to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Yes. Ms. Bailey. Present. Mr. Banks.
Here.
Janet Parker.
Here.
Ms. Bomke.
Here.
Ms. Crystal.
Here.
Ms. Franklin. Mr. Kelly.
Here.
Ms. Lamb. Ms. Lawson.
Here.
Ms. Mitchell.
Here.
Mr. Skinner.
Here.
Mr. Smith. Mr. Walkinshaw.
Here.
Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Over to Mr. Dalton.
Yeah, just, thank you, Madam Chair. Just as a reminder, in this room, we do have a couple of evacuation routes. And those evacuation routes are actually posted on the, adjacent to the exit locations here. So, but in the event that we have to evacuate this space, we can take one of two of those evacuation routes. I wouldn't recommend that you stand and look at the evacuation route. You might get run over. So anyway, just want to remind you where those are at. We do this facility is set up with an AED device, which is outside those double doors on the wall adjacent to the elevator. I do have a handful of staff that's AED, CPR certified, maybe just by a show of hands. In the event that we need to, and board members, of course. And then in the event that we need to contact first responders, I've got I'm going to use Mr. Swartz as my primary 911 contact, and then Mr. Duque over here, you'll be his backup. Does that sound good? Okay, Madam Chair, that's the end of my safety brief.
Thank you. First, we have the approval of our agenda. Is there a motion and a second to approve the agenda? Billy and second in favor of approving the agenda. Aye.
Aye.
Discussion. Next, we have the approval of the minutes of the September 17th, 2021 VRE Operations Board meeting. Does anyone have any corrections to the minutes? Hearing none, is there a motion and a second to approve the minutes?
Second.
Thank you. It's been moved by Ms. Crystal, seconded by Ms. Okay, thank you. Sorry. It's been a long day. And it's 9 a.m. All those in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
Madam Chair, sustain.
Any other abstentions besides Mr. Skinner? Motion passes. So welcome everyone to the October VRE Operations Board meeting. As you can tell, I'm struggling a little bit with my, I need to drink some more caffeine, but it's lovely to see you all as always. As a reminder, we are streaming this meeting live on YouTube with our mics throughout the room. So please make sure to keep any side conversations to a minimum. And please speak up and project your voice when addressing the board. Some of you are seated farther away from mics than others, so it can be difficult for remote viewers to hear. So we try to keep that in mind. And then as a couple of reminders for our next meeting in November, the audit committee will meet prior to the November meeting. The committee will be meeting with representatives from PB Mayors, VRE's financial auditor, who will review VRE's financial statements and their opinion letter. And you can see those members of the audit committee on the PowerPoint in front of you. The finance committee will meet following the board meeting. And then I will also be appointing members to the nominating committee in November. And so I need at least one member from each commission, one from PRTC and one from NBTC. So if you are interested in serving on that committee, please do let me know as soon as possible. You're welcome to talk to me after the meeting, send me an email, call me, carry a pigeon, any form of issue. With that, I think I will.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As always, we'll start off with safety. Some really important things have happened over the month of September, up to and including even last night. So let me start with, as you know, VRE works to ensure that our first response and our law enforcement teams are familiar with the most important aspects of the VRE operation and specifically, but more generally, the railroad environment. And so we frequently work directly with first responders, law enforcement from all of our jurisdictions and the region. So a couple of events this month on September, in the month of September. September 27th, we had first responders, actually a class from the fire and EMS school there from the city of Manassas. We were able to bring them out and familiarize them with our equipment, our rail yards and operations, dispatching, that type of stuff. So that, again, very consistent with what we do with our member jurisdictions, and that was a good event. Also wanted to highlight, so over to the right here a little bit, we had another event. This actually occurred yesterday, whereby the VRE hosted, provided the site, and then the FBI managed an event for K9 teams throughout the region. And actually expanded as far as we had some K9 teams from North Carolina, and I believe one team as far north as Massachusetts came down for this event. This is a big deal, and particularly when the FBI puts it on. And we've done this event a couple of times, but just wanted to highlight this. We had over, throughout the day, we had over 100 teams, K9s, plus their handlers. And basically what they do in the environment within our maintenance and storage facilities is there are, fake bombs, simulated bombs, fake bombs. Let's just call them fake bombs. Don't really go off. And they're located throughout the yard. There's some different obstacles that the K9s go through, up to and including on board our trains. And these teams are evaluated, and it's considered a pretty, to go through one of these that the FBI puts on, it's considered a pretty prestigious thing. So we're happy to support this. It's, I believe, about the third time we've done this since I've been here. So just want to highlight that. And then addition to this actually occurred yesterday as well, actually last night. We were able to once again celebrate a safety milestone in conjunction with our contracted service provider, Keolis, and their mechanical team here at the Broad Run Maintenance and Storage Facility accomplished a milestone, 6 years, injury-free. And as I've stated before, the threshold for this metric that we use, it's an FRA reportable injury. And so to go 6 years, and it's actually, yesterday was 2,200 days, so it's actually slightly over 6 years. The threshold here is that if somebody, has an incident or something and even gets prescribed prescribed like ibuprofen or something, it makes it on as a FRA reportable. So you could just imagine that this is a pretty tight safety requirement stuff. So just really wanted to highlight that. This is a heck of an accomplishment, and just to give you some idea, on average over the last 10 years, there's slightly over 4,000 incidents, railroad accidents, incidents, again, on an annual basis over the last 10 years. So to be able to go, particularly in this environment, in maintenance of rail equipment stuff, to go this long without a reportable is just phenomenal. You heard me say this last year when we celebrated the 5 years. Well, 6 years is even more profound. So just want to, give a shout out to John Cairns, the general manager for Keolis, Paul Garnett, the chief mechanical officer for Keolis, Phil Leonard, the equipment supervisor, Andrew Murray, who is the leader of this team at Broad Run, and a whole host of everybody else that make this happen. So that is on the safety side. Ridership for the month of September, somewhat on par for August, albeit we had 2 fewer operating days, but you can see, actually probably see more so from the average daily ridership, where our average daily ridership continues to tick up. And even through the first part of October, we continue, we've had subsequent days where our ridership is, actually, we're hitting, albeit it's in the low to mid 3,000s average daily ridership, but we're eclipsing the numbers, the lowest numbers that we've had throughout the pandemic. So maybe I'll revise my statement. As I said before, we're getting ridership back one rider at a time. I think we're at 2 riders at a time now, slowly upticking. So nothing else is headed in the right direction, albeit painfully slow. On-time performance for September, we ended at 85%. We really started the month off really good, and then had some issues towards the end of the month, and these were well, I'll get it. I have a slide up here that actually dissects it a little bit. So once again, and you've seen these tables before. We're still, we did have the last part of the month, we had some very, I'll just say, incidences as it relates to some signal issues that affected a lot of our trains getting out of Union Station. I've mentioned this before, that even throughout the summer, we've had, and these are signal issues in the tunnel, in those portals. And so Amtrak has taken several steps, and again, I've briefed you on enhancing and or just simply improving the ventilation system in those tunnels, because those tunnels need to breathe. And if they can't breathe, then a lot of moisture gets built up in those tunnels and they affect the signal system. So Amtrak actually went ahead and shut down one of those portals, the southbound portal that we use predominantly, and did a lot of major drainage work in there. So that should start reducing some of those signal issues. And of course, having those signal issues end up resulting in, or partly end up resulting in congestion. So that's basically from a frequency table standpoint. The table up here on the slide sort of shows where we're at. If we could knock out those signal issues, those congestion issues go down, and then we're just dealing with the everyday aspects of the railroad, which is weather and some other things. So my project spotlight, just wanted to bring you up to date on a project I've spotlighted before, and that's the implementation of our enterprise resource planning system. We did go live on the financial purchasing modules, which includes accounting and stuff, on September 1st. So the month of September, we completed the first month of that, and essentially as good as these types of implementations can go, I think we've done well. I know we've done quite well. Obviously, a lot of learning curve stuff in there, but no major red flags. And I'm looking back at Mark Schofield, who's actually intimately involved, and he's got a smile on his face. So I'm not saying anything completely out of turn, but nonetheless, for those that have gone through these before, they're very painful. And not that we haven't felt pain, but it's been pretty moderate to date. And again, I have to hats off to the team at Tyler Muniz, Mark Schofield, Robert Hostelka, and basically the entire staff. So now we, of course, fine tuning those modules that we just stood up. And then now we're moving into the equipment asset management piece, which includes our inventory control management. And then subsequently we have HR module and some other things to implement. So we will be continuing to roll out the entire enterprise system primarily throughout this fiscal year. But I did want to just give you an update. It was a major milestone. As most of you know, we've been working on this for a couple of years. It was conceptualized 5 or 6 years ago with the support of this operations board, our previous operations board. So pretty exciting. We're happy to be into implementation. Our FY23 budget, just wanted to give you just wanted to give you just a status, more from a process standpoint on where we're at. The month of October, and actually next week, we have a couple of full day sessions as we typically do, where we meet with department heads, division managers and stuff like that to essentially finalize the operating budget. We are still working to finalize at least the proposed or draft capital improvement project. And of course, subsequent to the commission's approval to reach out to the jurisdictions with our proposed budget and stuff, we're working staff back comments as well. The month of November, we'll come back to this operations board and update you on the capital improvement budget and update you on some of the latest projections that we have been talking about as they relate to partly relate to key issues. And then the finance committee is planning to meet after the conclusion of the November meeting and to go over some of these things, some of those topics in more detail. With ultimately coming back to this body in December, and we will present to you a final budget for referral to the commissions, and that budget will go to the commissions in January. So from a process standpoint, we're on track. We're still working out a lot of details. We're particularly on the operating budget. We're scrubbing a lot of details, I will say, and we are sharpening our pencils and doing all those appropriate things as it relates to prudent fiscal management. And I will note too, we do have some contracts that are driven by escalation clauses as it relates to the CPI. And so the month of it, those numbers come in timing wise, we use the month of October. And so those will come in at the end of October. So at the November meeting, as long as we have access and all of this has been pulled together, because it's not just CPI, it's actually the AAR rates as well. We'll have some idea of what those escalation rates look like. We actually have, just plugged rates into the budget now. So we'll have some idea what those actually look like. And just as a reminder, those escalation rates are on some large contracts, like our contracted service with Kiowas and those guys. So anyway, just wanted to give you an idea where we're at with our budget process. We'll pause here for a second. As I mentioned last month and to the commissions, we were happy once again to participate in Clifton Day this past Sunday, October 10th. It was a great event. The weather held out. It was a little cloudy, which is good because we've been out there and it's been sunny and 80 degrees. And it makes the rain kind of held out, but nonetheless, this is the 53rd year that Clifton has done this event. VRE has provided service for this event. We're almost, 30 years old? About 25 of those years. And we skipped last year because of the pandemic. So, again, great to be out there. We did have some, enhanced protocols for face cover wear, making sure passengers were wearing face coverings and stuff while on board the trains. Had really no issues with that. Everybody was very cooperative. And at last report, this may not be the final number, but there was well above 2,000 people that rode our trains throughout the day to get to this event. So I'm not sure. I know staff was there. I'm not sure if any of you made it there, but if you don't, I'll start putting a plug in for next year to go to this event. It's a great event. And then just finally, did want to say that we did previously reported that we were looking to implement our new service schedules back on September 27th. We deferred that. And so we will be implementing our new schedules as previously discussed with this body Monday, October 18th. So it's full steam ahead, if you will. And we look forward to implementing those schedules. We've gotten very few comments back from our riders and stuff like that. Most of the comments have been, yeah, great. You guys have listened to us, particularly on some of those, where I discussed where we brought train 303 out earlier in the afternoon to try to minimize some conflicts with Amtrak trains and other VRE trains. So anyway, look forward to that. I will be coming back to you and report to you on how that's going, and from a service optimization standpoint, as previously mentioned, looking at the performance level of this as well. So with that, Madam Chair, I'm done with my comments. So anybody have any questions?
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so excited. I'm really super excited about this schedule, and so much. I'm going to be on that train Friday. So I can't be on the one Monday, but I'll be on the one Friday. I'm pretty excited to be a part of that. And I'm just saying, I live near a train station. And I've heard so many comments from people that have been looking forward to this schedule. They were really sad about the delays, but, you know, good to this board for bringing that forward. And yay, go forward.
Thank you, Ms. Lynn. Mr. Skinner?
I got two questions, probably one Rich can answer and one for you. Is, do we have an idea of the funding through government that helps us get through that we've lost the passenger fare? I mean, do we know that, have any idea how long that would be in place? Sure. And the last question is there a point in ridership where it's self-sustaining, but in the fare, passenger fare? Like, is it right now we were at the getting funds from the federal government, that's fine. But that's probably gonna run out sometime. Where do we stand that we can sustain VRE with a certain amount? And remember, when I say sustain, I still know we get money from the state and stuff. That's what we're getting. How many passengers to bring it up to where we can survive? Just the money that we do know we get, not the federal government, state, and whatever we get.
So let me start, and then I'll ask Mark to jump up here. I'll start with, it's not just a ridership count that determines that. What also partially determines that is what the average ticket price that riders are paying. So in other words, if the preponderance of the riders are coming from the Stafford County, Fredericksburg area, Spotsylvania County area, they're of course, because of distance, they're paying in the higher fare zones, right? So as compared to if that ridership was coming from the middle of the service in the Prince William County area, and of course Broad Run out on the Manassas line. So it's not just a ridership count, it's sort of what the purchasing behavior is, the ridership behavior, where their origination station. So it's hard to give, a clear answer on just from a ridership perspective. So there, and I will also point out that just remember that, fare recovery, from a fare recovery standpoint, we are, have a 50% fare recovery from our riders, 50% of our operating budget. So so those are a couple of points. Maybe Mark, if you want to speak, if you can, and because I know you just have the numbers running in your. Where we're at from a federal assistance standpoint.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I got it. So, we did very well in terms of pandemic act and rescue plan. So on. There is no immediate need to spend it all right now. It's not gonna lapse on us, Or so we have a few years to use that. So I wouldn't be worried about that. I would also just add to what Rich was saying, that passenger behavior, we're really going to have to wait a little bit and see what the passenger behavior is, not just in terms of geographically where they come from, but also, are we going to see a shift from people buying monthly tickets to maybe buying 10 ride tickets? 4 to 5 days a week before, they are, say, riding 2 to 3 days a week because they're working from home more. If they still buy a monthly ticket, well, we're still going to be okay. We might have lower riders, but we might have sort of a higher average fare per ride. That could sort of get us back to being, we're saying, able to be sustainable over the long term. But if you have a person who was riding most of the week, now they're only going 1 to 2 days a week to work, or not at all, maybe they're buying a 10-trip ticket, maybe they're not. That's harder to sustain. So and we're just gonna have to wait. Wish I had a better answer.
Good through 20.
Good through 24, and we're gonna continue to let the calendar do its job, right? We need some time here, and as we transition into whatever that post pandemic world looks like, that but we're watching it. We're got it front and center, and we've done so much scenario planning on what the future looks like that I'm just not sure there's more scenarios that we can do. But nonetheless, it's in front of us. We're watching it, and as soon as we can, there becomes something tangible to share, we'll definitely do that for this board.
So, Mark, are our monthly fares a certain discount? Like, how can we market and still stay ahead, pushing the monthly fare versus the daily?
Yes, I don't have the number right on hand, but our monthly tickets are significantly discounted compared to just it's like the one ride costs a certain amount. The 10-trip has a discount of about, I think, 10%. And the monthly has a discount of about 10% or something like that. I can get you the number. We could look at sort of changing the mix there.
Sure. We may have to. I don't even know right now, what is the OPM's position on teleworking? Is that what it's called? The Office of
Yeah.
Personnel Management?
They
What are
had,
federal employees?
yeah, they had asked all the agencies to give them plans for employees returning to work, and that was sort of immediately pre-Delta, and so they all submitted their plans, and then it all kind of changed because then they pulled back. Still, Rich, I know you talk to some of those people pretty regularly. I think we're still in a transition. I think we're really looking at the beginning of this calendar year, probably.
Do we have any idea of how many riders are federal government and how many are private?
I believe this isn't exactly your question. I believe about 70% of our riders get the transit benefit,
Okay.
which obviously helps them to pay their fares. I would have to go back and look at the survey to say how many of them are actually federal employees versus.
But 70%.
Yes, we are. The transit benefit is very important for majority of our riders. Yes.
Madam Chair, I was just gonna, the high end of that number for federal workers is, it bounces a little bit, but it's in that 60 to 65%. So use 65% side.
Question in regards to signal issues, which is the number 2 factor in our cause of delays. Besides the Union Station tunnel, are there any other locations where signals experience a high frequency problem?
Compared to Union Station, no.
Besides Union Station?
Yeah, I mean, we've had signal issues along the line. We actually had say back in August, I believe. I can go back, but get this clarified for you. But on the Norfolk Southern line, we actually had a signal outage in the middle of our operation, which again, 12 years, I've never seen that. So that was just like a one-time. So I wouldn't say that that's systemic. And again, it's a fail-safe system. So that there are issues with the whether it's directly in the field or some back office system or whatever, the system will fail safe, and the signal system will go dark. If it's dark, that means all trains have to stop. So there's been some other, even on the CSX side, when they were doing some maintenance away work, which is when you typically see this. If there's maintenance away work going on adjacent to or in an interlock, that's where we start to see that, right? While they're doing that work. We had a couple of those back in July when CSX was out doing some work, but that's, to some degree, that's predictable. The majority of our signal issues, as you've seen up on that graph, have been coming out of Union Station. Bottom line, that's where it's at. They know it. As I've reported before, some of it required replacement of, let's just say some old equipment, right? It's from an infrastructure standpoint, there definitely needs some modernization work. Reported before that we've actually been, speaking with and talking to Amtrak about, not just nudging them in that direction, but if there's an opportunity for us to participate to accelerate that work, let us know what we can do. So.
Our topic is public comments. Public comments continue to be taken electronically, and the period for written comments opened last Friday and closed at 8 a.m. this morning. We did receive a couple of comments. Those have been forwarded to all members and will be attached to the minutes of today's meeting. I'd also like to ask the clerk to brief us on those comments.
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. We have a comment from a Mr. Stephen Rapetsky of Arlington County, and he writes, "Hello, I strongly recommend the VRE Operations Board oppose the resolution of support for Prince William County application for the Route 1 at Route 123 interchange funding for NVTA FY 2022 through 2027 6-year program. This project, as currently proposed via the Woodbridge Area STARS STARS study, is significantly over-designed and serves only to increase vehicle speeds, reduce safety, and induce additional vehicle trips in the area. The alternatives presented thus far restrict vehicle turn movements to and from the VRE and include circuitous bike pedestrian movements to access the station. This project does little to provide additional access to potential new riders to help grow the service, but instead it makes it easier for vehicles to bypass the station to access I-95. The VRE Operations Board should wait until a preferred alternative is selected to reconsider this action item. Thank you, Stephen Rapetsky, Arlington County resident. We had another comment from Mark Scheffler. It was summarily the same comment, and these both will be attached to the minutes.
And thank you. We appreciate the comments, and we'll be discussing that item 9C on our agenda. And while we encourage members of the public to view these proceedings on live stream, this meeting is still open to the public, so I want to make sure and see if we have any members of the public who would like to comment. See any? So we will move on to our action items. First up is 9A, a resolution to authorize the CEO to amend the contract for final design services for the Crystal City Station Improvement Project. Mr. Dalton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, we're seeking authorization to amend the contract for engineering and environmental services for the VRE Crystal City Station improvements to VHB, and specifically to exercise option A for final engineering design service in the amount stated in the resolution plus a contingency for a total amount not to exceed $2,500,844. So simply put, we have this particular design contract is a multi-step process. And so as some of you recall, we awarded the contract to VHB. They've been performing up to 30% design level and preliminary engineering work. And so within that contract, there was option A, option B. Option A would be to take this work into final design, which essentially is taking all the work that's been done up to 30%, including stakeholder comments and other inputs, and refining that 30% design to take it to a 60% level. And so that's essentially what this ask is. I will have to emphasize that this isn't a negative thing, but there's an enormous amount of stakeholders in this project. And
The best euphemism.
so So it's important to us to maintain some continuity between, the folks that did the preliminary engineering work for us and moving it into final design. So where there could be a break here, I'm just throwing it out there. It's important that we maintain that continuity at this point. So that is our recommendation, Madam Chair.
To approve resolution 9A. It's been moved by Ms. Crystal and seconded by Ms. Bailey. Are there any other questions or comments?
Rich, is this, when I look back at the fact, this project began in 2019, or was a date in March 15, 2019? That continuity as well?
That was, I believe, the beginning of the
Of
the current work,
Contract.
the VHB contract.
Okay, okay. Just,
There was actually work going on before that, but
I thought so, but I just needed to clear.
Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Passes. Item is 9B, a resolution to authorize the CEO to issue a GEC 8 task order for construction management services for the Quantico Station Improvement Project.
thank you, Madam Chair. Seeking authorization to issue a GEC construction management task order to STB Incorporated of Fairfax, Virginia for construction phase engineering services for the Quantico Station improvements in the amount stated in the resolution, plus a contingency for no total amount not to exceed $419,763. Just as a brief, I'm sorry. I was getting some eye darts back there and I wasn't sure what they were. I don't know why they give me control of the clicker. Nonetheless, just a quick little background on this particular project, because of course at VRE, we can't do each project the same. We've got to put some variation into it. It keeps things exciting. It keeps people motivated and stuff like that. And those are all good things. This particular project, the final design efforts were primarily led by DRPT through a task order with STB. We picked this project up at 90%. And then we issued separate task order to complete final design. And of course, that included construction administration and all that type of stuff. It was in that time frame when we picked up that work that, well, frankly, a lot of the final work for transforming rail in Virginia was happening. And so we needed to take somewhat a relook at that area to ensure that we could, that in the future, if there was a fourth track that needed to come through that area, we were contemplating a third track. We collectively, until TRB came along. And then, so we needed to do some modifications to the design, so on and so forth. So that did actually eat up some of our, construction administration budget. So we came back to DRPT and said, hey, scope has changed. And of course, the duration of the effort has changed as well. So working through with staff at DRPT, we all agreed that durations changed, and of course, DRPT is funding this through IPROC, and the state through some smart scale money agreed to expand that budget. And so this is actually the formal action to put that in place. This should cover us essentially for contract administration services through the duration of the rest of the project. So that's my summary, Madam Chair.
Is there a motion and a second to approve resolution 9?
Second.
By Ms. Bailey, seconded by Ms. Franklin. Are there questions or comments on this item?
Actions are we taking to make sure that this doesn't happen in such a case? Because when I look at the project and we went through the contingency for engineering, I assume those are engineering change requests, right? So for scope changes. So it seems crazy to have spent all the money on administrative actions. We don't have the money for the construction side. So it makes me, and it happens, I get that. But what are we doing to ensure that, our budgeting process is more accurate in the future?
Madam Chair, I'll just say, and I'm going to emphasize, when we were nearing the final design part of this project, the transforming rail, I'll just say concept, the project was being laid out, it had the potential to materially affect this project here. So we had to pause, had to go in and do, we basically had to, I think in the end, we had to slightly shift some elevator towers. I mean, and frankly, it wasn't a budget process type issue. It was more of a scope change. But this scope, we weren't contemplating this when this project started a couple of years prior to. I'm going to say, yeah, that 90% process took a couple of years until we got to that point. So I wouldn't say it's a budget issue. What we are actually doing is reacting to what is, what an update or what the update in the corridor looked like, right? And actually, what we were reacting to is not to be able to preclude being able to expand in that corridor in the future to a fourth track, which is, as I said before, had not been contemplated before. It was only a third track. So it's definitely not a budget process issue.
I think it's important that the public knows that because it's been going on for so long. So stating that earlier we said it was administrative scope change, now restating and saying it's all this scope change, I think is.
Ms. Bailey?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And to my colleague's point, thank you, Rich, for explaining, because the public does need to know, understand. It's not always fiduciary that we're talking about. It's just making sure that there is an alignment. So thank you so much for the explanation.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? Motion passes. Next item is 9C, resolution of support for Prince Williams County's application for the Route 1 at Route 123 TA FY 2022 to 26 year program.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will just simply state, the operations board through the VRE staff has been being asked to support this application being made by Prince William County. And I could give some level of overview of this project, but since we have staff from Prince William County in the room and they're prepared to give view of this project, I will ask Paulo Bolito if you would like to get up and.
Can I ask a question first? More important thing for me is, frankly, this is an MBTA. This is a Northern Virginia thing and Northern Virginia funding. So in all probability, Fredericksburg is going to abstain because it's really not in our bailiwick. But more importantly, I want to know what the impact of the project is directly to VRE. Understand exactly. I mean, is that part of this presentation? I'm looking at these maps and I'm kind of going,
It's across.
other than moving vehicles around to parking and stuff like that, I don't see a huge aspect of this for us.
With Madam Chair, and Mr. Bolito, you heard.
Yes,
Mr.
I'll address that,
There.
yeah.
So if you could, and just for the rest who don't know Paulo works directly with VRE staff through our BCC cooperation, and Paulo is a planning manager with Prince William County. So without further ado.
He runs us, if you want to.
Thank you, Rich. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Operations Board. Thank you for this opportunity to discuss our project. I know we received some comments this morning. On October 1st, the Prince William County submitted a funding application to NVTA for the FY 22-27 6-year program for interchange improvements at Route 1 and 123. And the reason we're requesting support for the application is I had to give some handouts. And you can see, if you look at the bottom left of the first page, for example, you see the VRE station. That's the Woodbridge VRE station. And what the project does is creates a new overpass on 123 over Route 1 and the CSX tracks, and looking at improving not just operations at the intersection, but also improve access to the VRE station. The request was approximately $68 million. to fully fund the project. And design wouldn't start until FY 26 or 27. That's when the MBTA money becomes available. There were some questions about bike ped access. The current concept we're looking at has a trail on the 123 overpass and trails along Route 1 on both sides and within the project limits. And the real intent is to really look at operational improvements that's cost effective. The initial VDOT design was more of a standard interchange design with 4 ramps. What we're looking at is a project with a smaller footprint, which really supports the Northwood Bridge Smart. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much for joining us and for summarizing the project. I would like to talk a little more about what you were saying in terms of improving access to the station. One of the things I got from the Prince William resident, that it actually seems to do more to bypass VRE and take 95 instead.
Sure. Alternative 2 on the second page was the concept that the county submitted for funding. Conceptual at this time. If we receive funding for design, we'll design the project in greater detail. But yes, right now there's no direct access. The trail and the sidewalks are not directly going to be to the VRE station, but they are on the overpass, and you can see some access points that allow safe passage. On a separate note, we are looking for a funding for a pedestrian bridge that would connect the future town center directly to the Woodbridge VRE station.
And that project, a pedestrian bridge, is not submitted for.
That's a separate project, so we're looking at a separate project for that.
Paulo, is that would that be a proper in the Station Plaza project?
It's something we're working with. It's something that could be potentially considered, but we're also looking for other funding mechanisms to fund that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Paulo, for being here with us to explain this morning. This also offers a safety arm to the project as well, which has been much needed over the years. So I just wanted to put that out there as well for pedestrians and the like.
So just a thought, I think I'm having a hard time understanding the current conditions. How would a pedestrian or cyclist access the VRE station currently? How does this change their mode of access?
Right now, they would have to access the intersection of Route 1 and Dawson's Beach to the left side of the sketch. This is conceptual. We'll still include bike path facilities at that location, so it shouldn't change too much. But what we're adding is the additional facilities that would come with the interchange and the overpass you see there in the concept.
So would a pedestrian now encounter a high-speed on-ramp where they wouldn't otherwise?
There's certain elements, certain ramps they may have to cross, but we would place it at a location that has adequate sight distance, for example. But there are also areas where it would be an overpass, for example, or the ramp.
And I think, I have respect for my colleagues in Prince William. I respect that this might be a good project for Prince William. It's not immediately clear to me that it serves VRE's interest. I wonder if maybe we should just take a pass on having a formal statement on the VRE. I'm thinking, for example, if there's going to be additional pedestrian access coming at a later date and we can support Prince William in seeking funding for that, I would be super supportive. But it seems like this actually might be making it slightly harder to access our station rather than easier.
It's conceptual and working with VDOT on determining different concepts. The handouts have the 4 concepts and we're narrowed down to 1 or 2. If we get funding for design, nothing is final. We'll still work with VDOT and the community and making sure there's safe access as part of the overall design. We wanted to show a conceptual design, which
Timeline for the other pedestrian bridge.
no timeline at this time. We did look for funding in the past, but we're not successful. But we continue to prioritize that footprint as well.
I saw Mr. Kelly and then Ms. Franklin.
Thank you for, I guess, playing. To Katie's point, this is primarily a road project. And you're putting a little bit in to try to get access to the station because the road project is frankly very large, very big, and it's primarily to move traffic around. And again, so I don't really see the huge benefits for it, but at the same time, Quest is not to an organization that we South really have any involvement in. I don't want to, we've had this conversation 1,000 times with other groups. We in the South do not want to get pulled into these kind of discussions when it really doesn't all of us. So I would have some concerns there. I mean, I'm going to abstain and just stay out of this. From Prince William North and kind of figure out how you want to do this.
That's great.
Yeah, so I actually represent this area, and just a couple of things to note. The support for the application would be for MBTA to consider both design and construction down the road once we get to that. So there's still a lot of room to, on the design phase, to figure out how to address better access issues for the VRE. I can tell you now, if you've not been in that area, there's very limited efficiency with regards to pedestrians to get to the VRE. I actually used to live about a block up from the VRE and had to walk down Occoquan Road to get to the VRE. There's very limited efficiency with regards to accessing the VRE or really anything else around there if you're a pedestrian. So one thing that we're trying to use this project to do is help revitalize that particular portion of Route 1. The additional improvements that Paula was mentioning with regards to the overpass, that's separate with a different development that we're working on. And so that's something that, you know, is not ready to kind of be discussed at this point. But I think the purpose of this would be to say, we know we need some improvements in that particular area. The VRE sits right across the road. And this can only, I think, help with regards to that effort. And again, this is for design and construction down the road. And so it's not tying our hand to any particular design at this moment.
Yes, I would just like to echo that some colleagues have said, and I appreciate Ms. Franklin's perspective since she represents this area. And I'd be more than happy to support a pedestrian bridge when we get to that point. I kind of agree that I would probably have to abstain on this as well, because it does seem like it's not really, say, focus or line of business for the.
Yeah, I think I'll just say it as someone who has boarded VRE at this station. The access right now is very problematic. There's just one intersection. Right? So traffic and pedestrians back up at the existing intersection on Dawson Beach. And in terms of pedestrian access and bicycle access, just so I'm understanding it correctly, the overpass that's in yellow, lighted,
Yes,
it doesn't exist currently.
not currently.
Right, so for a pedestrian who was walking from, just to give an example, Annapolis Way on the far right side, the status quo scenario, that pedestrian or bicyclist would have to walk or bike all the way to Dawson Beach Road back to get to the station. Through this concept, that pedestrian or bicyclist would have to walk or bicycle to new overpass on Belmont Bay Drive and access the VRE station.
That's correct. Currently one access point on Dawson Beach.
You know, I think we could debate whether there's sufficient improvement in terms of pedestrian or bicycle access as a result of this project, but it certainly is an improvement for a lot of folks.
Oh, I mean, if you've been in that area, I mean, right now it's kind of a mess.
Yeah.
We just widened the road particular area, but that's good in terms of moving cars. But when you're talking about pedestrians, we still have a lot of work to do, and this can only help with that.
It may not be a big deal right now if you're driving a car to go all the way to Dawson Beach Road. Sit at that pre-pandemic scenario as I've done before. But if you're walking to get to the VRE station under the status quo scenario, walking all the way to Dawson Beach, whereas in this concept, walk less than half the distance to Belmont Bay. So I appreciate the comments that maybe there's too much road and not enough pedestrian, but certainly it's an improvement over the status quo.
Mr. Kelly and then Mr. Alcorn and then Ms.
Ms.
Lawson.
Alcorn, I'll let you speak because you haven't spoken.
I was just gonna say, is it possible for us to endorse this project pedestrian, bicycle. VRE station, so it makes it relevant. This is conceptual. It's not designed, but frankly, us weighing on something that directly would affect VRE, I think probably does make sense, and hearing how things are right now, that's weighing. Seems like it would be relevant.
Just clarification, make sure I'm clear. If option 2 is picked, what is the, did you say 58 million is the total cost of the project, or we just talk about the engineer planning and?
So it's about 70 million approximately for the total costs. This project is unique. Supervisor Franklin mentioned that VDOT already widened the section of Route 1, so they already purchased the right of way and relocated utilities, so there's no right of way or utility phase, or very minimal. So the 70 million approximately will be for design and then construction. VDOT also completed the environmental process for the project already as well.
Lawson and then Ms. Crystal. Thank you.
So for your input, because definitely would complement an improvement for VRE pedestrian traffic or pedestrian riders. And Cross, as Supervisor Franklin just said, is a planned town center that's in the works. And that's why I asked if a pedestrian bridge would possibly be a proper, or transportation, as y'all know, is really good at chasing after different pots of money. My question is, Paolo, are you here today because this will help with MBTA if the VRE Ops Board
It's definitely something.
endorses it? That helps us score higher, or just get?
It helps show that there's support from a potential impacted agency. With VRE station being so close, we wanted to work with VRE staff and work ops board to see if we can get support for it. Just because of the impact, but it is something they consider and look at when they look at potential project impacts.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And I'm not saying this to spook anybody, please hear me on that. But the reason I got up and walked over to Supervisor Franklin, I asked her, we've had a number in the last 5 years of pedestrian fatalities on Route 1. And I asked her, have any of them been close to here? And we don't know the answer to that. But I'm gonna support this, whether we take a vote on it today or not, because in the end, I agree with Supervisor Alcorn. We do need to make sure that it serves the VRE interests, and so maybe we could word that in the resolution. But I think it's a worthy project for safety and connectivity, everything related to Route 1 right here, where I think it'll absolutely complement the station and improve the ridership.
Still, and then Ms. Bailey and then Ms. Momke.
I was just gonna say, I think I might be the only ops board member that serves on the NVTA, and so I do not profess to be an expert in the staff level scoring process that they tend to bring to the authority, but my understanding is resolutions from other agencies do not affect how they score for the authority, but it certainly enters into consideration. All of which is to say, I wonder if we might defer this conversation a little bit, because thinking about being a member of the NVTA who will vote on this 6-year plan, seeing a letter from the VRE at a later date would also be meaningful. And so I feel like what I'm looking at right now is a roadway project. I'm very compelled by Supervisor Franklin and Supervisor Walkinshaw as folks who have lived experience with the site describing it. I would love to hear a little more from VRE staff about, in your conversations with Prince William, how you're visualizing it, just a little more perspective on what that pet experience might be like, or driver experience, perhaps something that situates the VRE station even in the renderings that we're seeing rather than the roadway. And I think there might be a little time for us to do that and have a little more conversation about that, because I think resolutions of support, I understand, are due. The applications were due, I think, a couple of weeks ago. Resolutions are due now. But we would still have plenty of time to submit kind of a public comment, so to speak, on behalf of VRE. I don't believe the authority will be voting on the 6-year plan for a matter of some months at this point. Do you know offhand? It's spring, right? You have your hands full with your own funding rounds, but I can look it up. But I think there might be a little more time. I would just appreciate a little more kind of visualization of what this looks like from the VRE experience.
So will we be asking for, instead of a resolution, for us to just do a public comment?
Submit a comment, yeah.
I would.
Well, I was gonna say, and I just jumped Ms. Bailey and Ms. Momke, and I
Yeah.
apologize for that, but I thought I remember reading that letters of support or resolutions of support were
Resolutions or any letter of support would be due December 3rd, with applications being on October 1st. That being said, I'm sure, MBTA would consider or accept any comments down the road. In terms of timing of their 6-year program, they'll be evaluating the projects up until spring, and formal adoption will be in June of next year.
I was gonna say is it seems we do have a meeting between now and December
Mhm.
3rd.
Yeah, because I would be willing to defer until November for support a resolution, but I would want to go further than just a public comment.
Sorry, Ms. Bailey and then Ms. Momke.
I reserve.
On the fence, listening to all the comments, but I do appreciate all the comments regarding the pedestrians, because that is really important. I think that that's gonna kind of push me over the fence if we decide to vote on this today, but I would like to have a little bit redrafting of the resolution as it relates to that. But I can also defer to next month as well, whatever's the pleasure of everybody.
I want to comment again. I just wanted to say, just going back to something that Mr. Walkinshaw said and Supervisor Lawson, and thank you for bringing my comment back about the public safety pedestrian. I really appreciate that because this is an older area, and we, as Supervisor Franklin is saying, she is trying to revitalize that. Public safety is, pedestrian safety is a crucial thing. And knowing that James had lived there before, and we've widened the road there, and it's just a planning piece that's in collaboration, as Supervisor Lawson has mentioned, as it applies to VRE and increasing the ridership. So that's why it's so crucial that we really be more proactive than reactive. So the deferral I can certainly support in terms of Supervisor Franklin's determination. But just to give you a visual, going back to what Ms. Crystal was saying, give you a visual, it's an older area where there have been, if not fatalities, accidents in that area. So it's a part of a collective planning. So I just wanted to share that.
Mr. Kelly.
Yeah, just one last comment. I'm assuming we're moving towards deferral, but one of the things I want to point out, and I'm not one that always gives a lot of kudos to the state for the problems. Right now, I would assume during this process, one of the things VDOT came up with, because they are now so pedestrian and transportation oriented, that they said, do no harm to VRE or you have to do something. This is not a choice situation. The state's not going to let anything interfere with the station. So again, this is primarily a road project. And yes, the state came in and said, when you design this road, you've got to make sure you protect and or enhance the access to this project. So I just.
It's got many factors. Working with the VDOT team as part of their STAR study, multiple disciplines were involved, bike ped, all the different engineers.
It's required.
Correct, yeah. So
Mr. Skinner?
So you talked about your project being 70 million. Have any idea where funding?
the request for MBTA was right down here, 61.2. We do have about 6.8 in existing federal funds, RSTP funds already allocated to the project. At the time, the programming of funds, but the request for MBTA would fully fund the project. We have submitted it for other grant funding opportunities in the past, but we're not successful. So it's a county priority, and we'll continue submitting it for other funding programs.
Full projects in house, pretty much.
Correct.
We participated as a VRE pedestrian. And I would support that crossing for pedestrians. I would like the resolution to say that, and the funding for the and stuff like that really doesn't come with us. So write the resolution to where we support by civilian pedestrians walk station. Then I think we're doing it. See what we can support road work up.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I just want to make sure it's clear. This project would not affect the VRE capital.
just so we're all clear, okay? I agree with you. I think that we should add language into the resolution to make it specific to the interest of the VRE station pedestrians. Work on that between now and next month. So Supervisor Franklin wants to move to defer. I'll second it.
Sure, and I do just want to point out that, you know, it is kind of an issue of local access to our riders. And it does make the area more walkable, and it will include retail cycling. And it literally is right across from the VRE station where we're looking at these improvements. So it's true that it is a roadway project, but it does, it will have some impact on VRE, and we're expecting this area, when it's redeveloped, to feed more people into the VRE. So that's just something to consider, but Madam Chair, I make a motion to defer until November.
There's been a motion by Ms. seconded by Ms. Lawson to defer into November. I imagine you might want staff to also edit the resolution to reflect some of the conversation we've had here today.
Sure, and just to clarify that, you know, this would be a resolution in support of the project rather than a public comment.
Any other questions or comments, Mr. Kelly?
Hearing two separate things. I'm hearing we want to take a position, official position, addressing pedestrian access to our station, which is one thing, and then there's supporting the project. They're two separate issues. So are we coming back with just a resolution supporting the pedestrian components and protection of the station at the board, or are we approving, supporting, moving the whole project forward? Because again, to Meg's point, if it's from the board saying we want these pedestrian issues addressed for the station, I can vote for that because that's a VRE issue. If it's an issue of this is being used to hook into the road project to get funding, then it's not a Fredericksburg issue and it's not a VRE issue as far as I'm concerned, in which case we can. That's just letting you know. Well, I'm not going to vote against it. I'll just abstain. I don't know which way we're going. It's still not clear.
Franklin and then Mr. Alcorn.
Yeah, I think it's just amending the resolution to make sure that, you know, we mentioned kind of that there will be a positive impact on VRE. I think we're just kind of amending to guarantee that the support that we provide for it will in fact be positive towards Ridership or VRE operations.
Suggestion, it's a friendly amendment. Oral motion. Perhaps if it could be a little more specific resolution about pedestrian and bicycle access improvements station. And in addition to that, I'm still a little bit unclear from a vehicular standpoint, access to the VRE station. And frankly, I think it would be helpful for me to understand, is there a direct, basically, would it help VRE customers come and like staff to come back? However, the resolution, we can figure it out.
And we probably can just provide clarity. I'm not sure if that needs to be in there.
Separately from that.
More than happy to provide additional information. Apologize for not having a presentation, but more than happy to provide a more detailed sketch and more project information discussing the vehicular access and the bike ped access specifically. So I can send that ahead of the meeting. It's okay, Madam Chair.
To address Mr. Kelly's question and maybe clarify sort of what I'm hoping for headed into November. I think this project is worth supporting as the VRE. If, as has been well articulated by some of our members, it improves access and safety to the VRE. So I think what would be helpful is both for the resolution to say, we support it because, and then if we can just get a little more intel at the next meeting, that gives all of us confidence that this project will in fact do those things. Because otherwise, I think as Mr. Kelly suggested, we are just supporting an application for So that's my hope that the resolution would say that this is why we support it, and then maybe we'll have a little more insight into that is so. And I've also just procedurally did get a note from the CEO of NVTA who has been following us. Thank you, Ms. Backman. And she confirms that resolutions of support are due by December 3rd, and that resolutions of support from other transit agencies are qualitative considerations rather than kind of points on a technical evaluation as well.
Thank you, Ms. Crystal. Any other questions or comments? None. There's been a motion by Ms. Franklin, seconded by Ms. Lawson to defer to November. All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion passes. And I believe with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Dalton for our information.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we have a series of information items. So and some of those includes presentations. I'll be so we start with the legislative agenda item, which is 10A. First, I'll recognize the chair of the committee, Margaret Franklin. Didn't know if you wanted to tee up any comments to this. Joe Swartz, of course, is prepared to go through the draft agenda. So,
Correct.
Chair.
I'll just say, we'll have a legislative committee meeting after this, but generally for the public, we'll be talking about our legislative agenda with regards to any impacts that the General Assembly may have legislatively on VRE. And then we'll also talk about some of the federal legislation that's moving and would impact particularly the infrastructure bill and maybe even reconciliation, the impact that will have on our as well. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Schwartz for specifics.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. So a little bit on the logistics side of this. So what we normally do here is we have an information item this month. This will come back as an action item next month. To the commissions. This is one of those items that the commissions did not delegate down to the operations board, so they have to actually pass it at the commission level. The commissions generally pass their legislative agendas in December, so we try and match up with them. So same night. So moving into the draft that I put together, and we only had one committee meeting, unfortunately, to sort of discuss this. Much of this is very broad. It gives us the opportunity as things come up in the legislative session to sort of move as we need to. And I will come back, or I'll talk specifically with the chair of the committee and the chair of the ops board if there are specific things that are going on down there. I need an immediate answer of which way should we go on this. But generally, this will give us broad direction on how to move forward, what we're supporting and what we support, those types of things. So first off, it's state funding. We're always supportive of any of the funding programs that are at the state level. We always want to advocate for, at the very least, keeping the same levels, if not increasing the levels of those. We want to support the Transforming Rail in Virginia projects and protect any of the funding that's already been allocated to them. Certainly make sure we protect our CROC funding. Two of the things that are sort of added this year under this is exploring ways to diversify the CROC funding. It is all gas tax based currently, and as we've had that discussion, that we're not sure how that revenue source is going to play out in the future. So if we can look at ways to diversify that revenue source. And of course, as we've heard, the state had a pretty significant amount of budget surplus last year, and there will be discussions of what to do with that. And we want to make sure that transit and rail both are part of that discussion. Unfortunately, what I understand is if your surplus is so large that it hits a certain level, there are actually regulations that say this proportion has to go into the rainy day fund, and this proportion has to go over here. So there's a large surplus, and it seems to already, but we will stay in that discussion down in Richmond as they work out the budget. Under the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority, of course, we'll continue to work with them. We did have a discussion at the board level in July, if you'll recall, about possibly having somebody on the board that is a commission member. I did add that as part of the state legislative issues. That also got added on at the MATC level. They basically use the same language we did. They have already had their committee meeting to discuss that, and at that meeting, state weighed in and basically said they would not be in support of having an elected official from the commissions. So they ended up with some different language, which was basically that the governor would have to pick from a list that was provided from MBTC and RTC. So Supervisor Walkinshaw sort of led the effort for this particular item at MBTC. So sort of look to you if you want to say
Sure,
a few
yeah,
words.
thanks, Joe, and we discussed this at our also, and it's essentially just ensuring that long-term VRE, PRTC and PRTC have a voice. And Director Mitchell will point out correctly that the status quo legislation requires that appointments live in NVTC or PRTC jurisdictions, which I think demonstrates that the General Assembly recognizes it's important. I just don't believe that the fact that someone lives in a jurisdiction is appointed by the governor ensures that they are always going to represent the interests of those jurisdictions. And it's one of those issues that will only come up if we succeed. I'm sure we will in increasing ridership of both VRE and passenger rail, and ultimately some tension when it comes to use of the tracks. I just think it's important for us as VRE and MVTC to assert that we want to make sure VRE has a real seat at that table. And the language that you see here isn't not my preference, but I think it's a compromise between where the state is and where I think the legislative committees of VRE.
Just wanted to speak to this and say I'm really supportive, actually, of the substitute language. And I had been actually a little hesitant about the idea that the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority members had to come from one of the bodies, because those bodies are all elected officials. And I say this recognizing with some hypocrisy, because I serve on a number of these regional boards, but elected officials, as we all know, often have kind of limited time to truly dig in and steward an organization that I think at this point, this board is very hands-on, and that's for the better. But I very much associate myself with the spirit of what you're driving at. I know that DRPT and the governor's team actually did this as a matter of practice when they first comprised the VPRA, and I think trying to get it codified as a matter of law, so that if we are not always so fortunate to have a state that is as friendly to the commissions is really smart. So I'm really supportive of it. Willingness to compromise, because I feel really good about this one.
I still think in this, again, I don't think I'm in a position to make take a formal position on this right now. I would like to submit to be able to support the legislative agenda that VRE has. I don't think I could with this in it. And it's, I guess I'd like to ask or have you consider what's broken. I mean, we have worked very hard to represent VRE to make sure that the CEO is a member of the board, and have been making very significant investments as well. I think there are a lot of ways that we can address VRE's decision making for projects, for service planning decisions that we can do through agreements that may actually be more effective than necessarily just determining who's going to be selected for the board or who's sitting at the table. And so I guess I would ask that we consider that as well. I do appreciate the compromise language very much. And I think I second the comments of Ms. Crystal as well about some of the concerns we had about having current elected officials. But just the other concern I have that is not necessarily one that you all have to worry about, but I'm fairly certain that if this were to go through, we will have to adopt similar language for Hampton Roads for Richmond, for every other geographic area of the state. And that is something that I think might be a little concerning for us, because we did work very hard to make sure that the board members we have come from rail backgrounds, finance backgrounds, that have technical expertise that they're bringing to the table, as well as their understanding and knowledge of the geographic areas they live in. So, just anyway, that's just one thing that, those are just some of my thoughts on it and why I have some concerns about this specific language. But I do appreciate, again, the compromise and what you all are trying to do.
Mr. Kelly and Mr. Law, I will just add, I appreciate when the VPRA was first getting established, legislation didn't include any role for VRE, and Mr. Dalton was added, but he is a non-voting member. Mr. Kelly.
To answer the question, Jennifer, your office has been extremely helpful and supportive, ready to work with us. But you're not always going to be there. Administrations change, leadership changes. I've sat in rooms where your counterpart has sat here and berated this organization during the transition from Amtrak to Keolis, and basically stuck it to us big time during that whole process of the transition. Steve shaking his head because he was in the room for this. That is why. Because things change and we don't make decisions based on who's sitting in your chair today. We make it based on what's going on. I've seen ERPT go from way over here to way over here, and it got really nasty and really bad. And what we're doing now is you're putting an organization together that is planning rail for the entire state, which is every aspect of rail. And we are, frankly, in the grand scheme of things, a small piece of that. I think it's not too much to ask that we have somebody there at the seat of the table who can represent. And frankly, I would rather have somebody who has some knowledge and understanding of how this board operates, what this board is discussing on a regular basis. I know Rich can do that in part, but rather have a little bit more of an independent, this is us person in that room having that conversation. That's why, again, it's nothing, you've done a great job. I've seen some of your people who sat in your chair in the past that have really tried to do everything they can to stick it to this board, stick it to this organization. That will happen again. We'll go. I mean, the whole issue, and I got the letter, the email from our new head of this organization, who I have the greatest respect for, basically saying on the issue of whether or not we get the train slots or we don't use the train slots on a particular time, saying, I'm concerned about the makeup, the political makeup of the VRE board and what it potentially means to adding additional service. We have the same concern from our perspective with regards to how the state's going to handle it. And if the state wants to have that position, which they've taken, I do not see why it's an issue of us taking the same position and wanting to make sure that what this organization does.
Yeah, I really appreciate his comments and recognize that this puts her in a difficult position, and I probably would make some of the same arguments if I were in her shoes, but I want to associate myself with Mr. Kelly's remarks. And I should have said what I said at MBTC, which my support for this language says nothing about current governor, Director Mitchell, about the current members of VPRA, including all of whom have been vendors of VRE, but it is the unknown in the future, which could be 5 years from now or 50 years from now. And I think this is an important protection for VRE over those 5 to 50 years. And I do appreciate the political challenge that you face in Richmond, other parts of the state. This can of worms. I guess what I would say to them, and maybe I'm not the best messenger to them, but there aren't significant, sizable, I should say, commuter rail systems in other parts of Virginia. And I think it's also true that of every person who steps foot on a train in any given day, the vast majority are on a VRE train. Passenger rail is going to grow thanks to your efforts, but it's still relatively small compared to. So I would say that that this is unique relative to other state, and the congestion on the tracks here, I believe, is unique. These bodies deserve a little bit of additional consideration.
Any other questions or comments on that? Mr. Schwartz, were there more slides?
I have a couple more items to go over real quick here. Things that we've had in the past, things like supporting MBTAs. They look to restore MBTA funding. The Virginia Transit Association always does a good job of lobbying for the transit programs and would support anything that they're down there. And then the meetings held through electronic communication means. We know that the FOIA Council is considering some additional language that I think we would support. So as that moves through legislation, we would like to support that. And it just gives us the ability to have electronic meetings, not just during a pandemic situation. The transportation authorities, if additional transportation authorities, say in the Fredericksburg area, were to be considered, we would want to weigh in on that, of course, and then just sort of a catch-all other issues, anything that needs to come up. That's about it on the state side, unless anybody had questions or wanted to add an item.
I guess I would just add one thing on the electronic meetings. I think this came up at NBTA last night, and I know it's come up at, and it's been a while. I haven't looked at those other languages, but just want to make sure we're being consistent with those bodies' positions. And I think I would invite any comments on this, but I think previously this body has suggested that we would like the maximum flexibility possible. And my understanding is that's where those other bodies are. So just wanting to align.
Yeah. Also, we had a very robust conversation at the authority last night, including some very personal opinions about whether state legislators or local legislators work harder. So this is quite a conversation. But I do think, I mean, I would make the case anyway, characterizing it is really about resurface, and I suspect this may resonate bodies entirely within your jurisdictions, or the Arts Commission or anything else, and really the great importance of just giving some flexibility to those to set what the right rules may be, figuring out what the goals are in terms of preserving openness, but trying to the extent the state is willing to get out of the business of setting from Richmond what policy should be about how many meetings. So if we're supportive of that as VRE, I mean, I think to lobby for not only maximum flexibility in number of meetings, but just maximum ability for localities to set the right policy.
Other comments? Items? Okay, Mr. Swartz, federal.
Okay, I'll just move on to the federal really quick. So the COVID relief funding, we are keeping an eye on now, and we'd like to continue through next year. We are concerned that at some point, they're going to look to claw back some of that funding, unspent funding. Mentioned before, there actually isn't a deadline to spend some of this money. So any agencies like us are budgeting this or thinking about budgeting this out 23, 24 and such. And we're certainly concerns that somebody's going to come back and look at that. Oh, that money's not being spent very fast. Let's claw that back and use that on a different. So we'll continue to keep an eye on that and make sure that doesn't happen. The federal grants programs, we always keep an eye on those. And if we are applying for grants, to make sure that our applications move forward. As things change up there, as USDOT changes any rulemaking, we will make sure that it doesn't affect us negatively in any way. The surface transportation reauthorization is bundled up right now with the infrastructure bill. It does look like the infrastructure bill is going to move forward at some point. The real discussion here is more about the Build Back Better plan. That's the $1 trillion program that is getting cut at some point. It's like, in particular on this one, we want to keep an eye out on what programs are going to get cut. There is concern, watching this now, that in order to bring that top line number down, they may cut out some transportation programs, and particularly transit and rail. Specifically because in the infrastructure package and the reauthorization bill, the numbers have gone up a little bit. So they're sort of saying, well, you're already winning in this package, so we can pull some out. We'll do the best we can to make the argument that, well, programs were too low to begin with, and all of us, transit agencies and all the rail programs in the state could use the money that is in that Build Back Better plan. Let's see, the liability insurance reform. If you'll recall, we've seen issues with our liability insurance. That's the insurance we have to go overseas to get. It's a huge insurance policy that has doubled in price over the last couple of years. We are a member of the coalition, and that's an issue that all of the members of the Commuter Rail Coalition are keeping an eye on, and the Commuter Rail Coalition has actually put forth language that would set up a new federal program that would sort of not completely replace, but would allow commuter rail systems to get insurance through the federal government for at least part of what we're required to. Let's see, Surface Transportation Board Authority. This is the same thing we've had last year. We just want to make sure that commuter rail systems still have the ability to go to the Surface Transportation Board if we have an issue with rates or with Amtrak. And then we added the broadband infrastructure. We aren't, we aren't as VRE able to apply directly for any of this broadband funding, but we certainly want to keep an eye on what the programs look like and who we could partner up with. Sure, I know Ms. Lamb was interested in. So that's it for the federal issues.
Sure, you and I haven't had a chance to talk about this, but I know reconciliation is currently kind of being discussed, and that may be more harmful than anything, or maybe it'll be helpful, but something that we should keep our eye on, but just wanted to get your thoughts if we should at least just put it up there to at least pay attention to.
Sure, we can.
If you just want to explain kind of what that is also.
I don't have my federal consultant with him and here with me today, and he could certainly explain it way better than me. But basically, it's the way to forward without having to have at least 60 votes in Senate, and but you have to get all 50 votes. Right now, they would have to get all 50 votes. As we've seen, getting all 50 Democratic votes is not easy. So moving forward, there's going to be a lot of horse trading, basically. So we will certainly keep an eye on that and make sure it doesn't affect the programs that we get the vast majority.
Joe, are we still working with Ann, or you said I thought our federal lobbyist was.
So we're not working with Ann anymore. It's Cardinal Infrastructure, who was actually a sub to Ann, so you saw them often. And the person I deal with sort of day to day is Bennett, who is a key, even though the principals of the firm are actually.
I'm sure federal lobbyist attends the November meeting.
Absolutely, yeah, we'll have them here.
Comments or questions on the federal agenda?
Okay, so again, this is an information item. I will take back sort of the comments, and I'll reach out to the chair of the committee board to make sure that what comes in as an action item is what we discuss today. So, and I'm always available if anybody has any other questions later on. Comments.
Thank you, Mr. Next up, item 10B, I'd like to introduce Emily Stock from DRPT. Is she still here?
If I may, you mind if I just provide an introduction? when you get a
Really
chance?
hoping that you would.
Okay. So in the last General Assembly session, Delegate Rome sponsored a study resolution, asked DRPT to conduct a review, Gainesville to Haymarket, particularly the capital cost and riders. And so this is something we've actually had a number of conversations with her about in previous sessions as well. And so we prepared this analysis. We actually built it off of the work that was done by VRE and that concluded in 2017 now. Trying to remember when the decision was officially made to focus on Broad Run. But so we, through some consultants, brought in had some additional technical work done to look at the capital costs, the operating costs, and the ridership. The ridership actually was not something that I think we were required to look at, but we did sort of revalidate some of the earlier ridership assumptions. I want to be very clear that none of this at all was meant to be, and it's not at all meant to be, a second look or trying to second guess any work that was done by VRE previously. It really was to answer the mail on the legislative requirement. But hopefully you'll find some of the findings interesting. I also want to recognize Nick Ruiz, who's now with VRE, who worked on this study as well when he was with DRPT. But Emily Stock is actually, I would also like to know, she is our new chief of rail for DRPT. Okay, no. Okay. Emily's our new chief of rail with DRPT. And so I'm going to ask her to go ahead and give the presentation, but please, if you have any questions about context, background, or where this came from, just let me know.
Thanks very much, Director Mitchell. And yes, if you have any hard questions, do I need to hold this up?
Just make sure you have one.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. Yeah, if you have any hard questions, you can ask Nick. Nick knows everything. Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members of the board for having me today. So I'll be talking about the 2021 Gainesville VRE Extension Capital and Operating Analysis that DRPT is doing for the General Assembly. So as Jennifer mentioned, this is a required study, and the General Assembly didn't actually ask us for ridership numbers. They did ask us to evaluate, and this is the actual language from the budget bill, to evaluate the operating and capital costs associated with an extension of the Virginia Railway Express commuter rail service from Manassas to Gainesville. So we did look at the Gainesville Haymarket extension study that I have a date of 2018, but I know it was many years in the making. So I think the last document I saw was dated 2018 for that. We used it as a starting point, and you'll see that I reference it from time to time, but this is an independent cost estimate. We're not correcting what VRE did before, but we did compare previous forecasts to the actuals in terms of ridership, and then we really pulled apart costs and put them back together when it comes to operating and capital costs. So I'll move on to capital cost methodology. I'll talk a little bit about methodology, and then I'll move on to results. So the costs that we came up with are expressed in $2020 with a 30% contingency. And we did include all the costs that were included for the original study for the GHX study, but we also identified some freight fluidity operational costs that would preserve freight and passenger network fluidity. So track connections to the existing quarry yard that's in that area, grading, rail turnouts and crossovers, and associated right-of-way acquisition. So those things did add up. As I mentioned, we really took apart the costs and put them back together. So we estimated costs using quantity takeoff. So based on conceptual designs from the GHX study. So we relied on those designs, and we refined them through assembly-driven models. And so the costs are based on our experience in recent years working with some of those costs that weren't included in the previous previous study are really based on our experience working with Norfolk Southern over the last few years, and understanding what the freight pressures are to make sure that that we're maintaining network fluidity on those shared use corridors. But we would caveat this by saying that we would need to have additional coordination with Norfolk Southern Railroad. That would be necessary as expansion plans develop. So these costs are not necessarily what would be the final actuals, because of that additional coordination that would be needed. And we did also include the cost for a new maintenance facility alternatives that terminate in Haymarket or Gainesville. Sure.
Where do we come up with the 30%? Reason I ask that is we have that happens in VDOT and stuff of that nature. And sometimes that puts us out of the running for someone. How do you determine the 30% contingency when that's quite an expensive and throws it out of the ballpark?
Something that also represents the level of design that's been completed. And so I think in this case, I guess Christine, you may know actually the level of design that VRE had was, I think, probably in the 10 to 15% range. There is a set of guidelines that our consultants relied on, the standard industry practice about for the level of design, how much contingency you should include in your cost estimates. That goes down as your level of design goes up. I forget the source of the guidelines, but 30% is what is recommended as an industry practice for a cost estimate that's in that kind of 10 to 15%.
And thank you for answering that. I've in my experience, I've worked on projects that have actually been 40%. I've had 40% contingency also, because my former position is in planning. A lot of times when you're looking at long range planning, those percentages go up. So more about the capital cost methodology. I'm not sure how familiar you all are with the earlier study, but there's a high build capital cost estimate and a low build capital cost estimate, and we continued that model. So as background, Norfolk Southern did conduct an independent assessment in 2015 of track and signal design for a potential Gainesville or Haymarket extension, and they concluded that an additional third track would be necessary to preserve B-line freight operations. And you'll see that the B-line is that red and white line, the dashed line that goes out to the west, and that's about 15 miles long. So if VRE extended to Gainesville or Haymarket, we expect that the infrastructure could have 3 tracks or could have 2 tracks, and that gives you a very different high versus low build estimate. But it's not a given that would have to happen. Extension So a little bit about operating cost methodology. We used the earlier VRE study as a baseline and disaggregated the cost estimates and showed them by National Transit Database cost category, which is a standard procedure. We also were able to ground truth some of the costs because since the original study was done, we had actuals from 2013 to 2019 to gauge the average breakdown of expenses per category over time. So we had some good data there. And then another thing we did a little bit differently, we looked at cost elasticities to account for the nonlinear relationship between the changes in service, which are measured in train miles, and its effect on costs. So for example, general administrative costs, facility maintenance costs aren't necessarily a per mile calculation. You can get some economies of scale from those. And so we had a lower elasticity factor for those and higher for things like maintenance, vehicle maintenance costs. And then alternatives considered, even though the legislation asked us to look at a Gainesville extension, we did also include the cost estimate for Haymarket, and we looked at two different options for Gainesville, one with one station and one with two stations. And we compared those against a broad run terminus alternative. And of course, against the existing service that we have now. And we did take out the innovation station because that was not in the finalist alternatives for the earlier study. So conclusions, we had capital cost estimates between $783 million on the low side and $865 million on the high side. And annual O&M cost estimate was approximately $27 million per year. So also the Gainesville extension would bring between 677 and 787 net new riders to the system per day in 2030. So we looked at 2030 our year for ridership. And that's when compared to the selected alternative broad run. So that's how we got to the net new. And this is a little small. Hopefully you can see it on in your handout. But this compares the numbers that I just went through for the different alternatives. For that Haymarket alternative, the 3-station versus the 2-station, and then the broad run alternative. So all in all, while robust service expansion would yield higher ridership, there would be fewer returns for O&M costs as route miles are added beyond broad run.
So just in a nutshell, the capital costs that we've identified here are quite a bit higher than what was identified by VRE. And then the operating cost that we had estimated are a bit lower. But I think in general, and none of this again is meant to second guess any of the work that was done by VRE. I think if anything, it somewhat validates the decision that was made early on by this board to focus on the broad run extension. Hopefully the information is helpful in any future decision making about the possible extension. We were asked by Delegate Rome to also look at the innovation station and whether the additional ridership, as I understand it, that was taken out by, I think, the Prince William County from the original analysis. I don't know all the history there, but and she's interested in whether that station would add enough ridership to actually make it cost effective. But so anyway, this is hopefully, again, this will be helpful information going forward. Should there be another desire to look at this extension in the future?
I'm sorry, can you say that again about the innovation piece and when Prince William took that out? Because I don't think that's correct.
Is that something you can, and I don't know that I'm representing that fairly either.
So I was not involved in the earlier study. When I understand that it didn't come through the screening, that it wasn't one of the finalist sites in the screening when the earlier study was done, that these were the finalist sites.
Here, and this is in my district, and innovation was absolutely part of the extension. It was never removed. Matter of fact, well, the board just approved a town center at innovation. So I don't know where the disconnect is about innovation. I don't want to beat a dead horse because this is a dead horse. Thank you that Director Mitchell, that it affirms the decision that the board made 4 or 5 years ago that we were going to approve broad run, forego the extension, because frankly, it would have been a better use of tax dollars to pay people to just work from home rather than put almost $1 billion in capital infrastructure and only gain, I think it was maybe 1,000 new riders by 2040. I can't remember the exact numbers, but this just affirms the decision that we made. But I just wanted to make sure that there isn't misinformation about the innovation site, because that was absolutely studied. But what was interesting is innovation, because we also looked at the rail yard. Remember that? Well, I'm sorry, I'm looking at you and you weren't there. But that was another, and innovation had a very high projected cost if we were to end the line at innovation. Maybe that's where there's a little bit of a disconnect.
Yeah, it may have been, that's probably confusion on our part. I'd actually have to ask you guys and Christine and others that were involved in the study at that time for more background on that. I only pointed it out to note that
Sure.
that is something that Delegate Rome, we have presented the results to her already. When we did, gave her essentially the same presentation, she asked us to take a look at innovation and whether or not, there would be additional ridership, I think knowing the plan development levels.
I mean, after you presented this?
Yes. And let me back up for a second. So this has been submitted to the General Assembly. And as a courtesy, we always brief the sponsor of a bill before we submit it, because we don't want them to see it. So we gave her a briefing, I believe it was about a week ago, with essentially the same presentation. And we told her at the time that we also wanted to present it to you all, so there was no confusion about what this is or what it represents, why we were doing it. And so during that, when we presented it to her, she just asked a number of questions. I think she's very, excited about the potential for VRE ridership that could be generated at the innovation station. And she just wanted to know if, and I hope I'm not putting words in her mouth, but had asked us if we could take another look at the ridership estimates that were at innovation and, could that potentially change or make the analysis look more favorable. Yeah, I don't want to, I'll apologize to Delegate Rome if I'm mischaracterizing her comments at all.
Suggest that would be.
Question, was this included in the Prince William County's comp plan?
Look to Paolo for that. Haven't the comp plan?
It's mentioned in the futures plan, but we're going through an update right now.
Not in the comp plan, right?
Not specifically, no.
But question, I don't think so, but
It lets me know, what the locality is planning to do projects and
right.
this just seems like this was, like you said, it's being
Yeah.
a dead horse.
Yeah, it really is. Can I just say, if you choose to look at that again, will you, before you do that, will you have a discussion with me, Deputy County Executive, who's the former planning director, and I've had conversations with Mike about this extension just in the recent months, and it's just, I think you're wasting your time, and I don't want you to waste your time, so please, if you're gonna look at it, talk to us first.
Sure, I'd be very happy to. And again, that's why we're here. We wanted to make sure that you all had an opportunity to see this. We have submitted the report with the results as it is, and without anything in there about innovation. But I'd be more than happy to talk with you all, whether there's any.
Yeah, I wasn't here for the, it's a new horse, but I'm just curious, what were the land use assumptions in the study? I apologize if I missed it. I don't see it. I mean, did ridership numbers for two stations, did it assume existing land use or the comp plan or?
So for this study, we really ground truth the previous ridership estimates because we weren't, the legislation didn't require that we redo a ridership analysis. So, but we did look at it again and compare the previous estimates to the actuals between I think 2013 and 2019. And so we were able to apply that information. And then we also looked at more recent census data, Journey to Work survey data, and applied that too. And it turns out that the ridership estimates were very similar. So,
but as far as the ridership analysis that was done back then, I think we'd have to defer.
Right.
Let us know.
All right, yeah, I would be interested to know that. I mean, obviously the existing density is low. Keep it that way, but for the purposes of the study, if we're gonna invest in new stations, obviously, hope jurisdictions would look at. So I'd love to know just kind of the inputs for the previous study. It doesn't have to be now, but.
Just the short answer is that the ridership forecasts that were done as part of the previous study, which the forecasts were done in the 16 time. Regional forecasts and county input to those regional forecasts, long-range forecasts, in addition to travel model to identify potential ridership there. I will note, subsequent to that, Prince William County has continued to focus planning efforts in this corridor and has since adopted the Innovation Small Area Plan, which I don't know how that may compare, but was that innovation, even in this forecast that we're using, the VRE market study, did envision a community center there, an activity center at Innovation as well as Gainesville. And that was considered.
Before I turn over to Ms. Bonke, I was going to suggest that in the interest of time, perhaps any other follow-up questions can be directed to DRPT and answers responded to the entire ops board. But I know Ms. Bonke, you.
Sure. So I too was not here before, but whenever I hear people saying we're beating a dead horse, and it sounds like this horse has been dead for a while, I appreciate the fact that the General Assembly wanted to do a study. I guess my red herring goes up and says, and I have to ask on behalf, what did this study cost?
Off the top of my head, I'm trying to don't know off the top of my head. Yes,
I don't know off the top. I don't want to.
You can send the email out to the entire board. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Ms.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Mitchell. I actually really wanted you to Emily title.
Yes.
I didn't feel I should do that. So appreciate it.
Yes.
Moving on. So the next one up is Ms. Christine Hookner is our manager of project development. She's going to give us a quick and concise sort of recap of what our current system plan 2040 is. And really what this is about is to remind members what's in our current plan. And this is the lead in to start the work to make the plan. So with that, Christine, you should have a clicker up there. You can drive the rest of the way there. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and good morning, Madam Chair and members of the Operations Board. Thank you for your time. And as Rich said, I'll go through this somewhat quickly, the overview of the currently adopted plan, which was adopted in 2014 by the VRE Operations Board. A number of goals were identified for the plan. That is a long-range focused plan focusing on long-term VRE system needs and what would be needed to advance VRE's role as part of a multimodal regional transportation network. Some of the planning assumptions are listed here. One of the primary ones is that regional growth and congestion are inevitable, and that VRE can play a role in providing a competitive travel option and opportunity for the region. It did focus on some assumptions regarding the railroad corridors, one of them being that they would continue to be a future shared interoperable passenger freight network with 4 tracks between Alexandria and Washington, D.C., and 3 tracks south of Alexandria on the Fredericksburg line. Some of those assumptions have now changed, and we'll have an opportunity to talk about those later, but those were the basis of the assumptions going forward with the development of the plan. A number of system improvements were identified in the plan based on a market analysis and identifying where the potential was for growth in the system through 2040, which was the end year of the analysis. The proposed service improvements are contingent on a related set of system investments that were identified in the plan, as well as new agreements with the host railroads above and beyond the agreements that were in place at the time the plan was developed. The ridership forecast focused on 3 phases segmented by time, with ultimate potential by 2040 of doubling VRE service through an incremental expansion of both infrastructure investments as well as service expansion. Some of the capital investments, they were tied to the service expansion investments in a phased implementation and focused on a number of the investments that are currently in the VRE capital improvement program, including fleet expansion, station improvements. Also envisioned a Long Bridge corridor that was prior to Transforming Rail in Virginia initiative and the formation of the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority. So there was an assumption that VRE would shoulder a certain portion of the cost, both for the Long Bridge as well as third track between Washington, D.C. and the Spotsylvania unit. After the adoption of the system plan, there was a further financial plan developed that looked at the funding needs to implement the system plan and looked at various scenarios ranging from the full system plan implementation as was outlined in the plan to more incremental or modified service expansion. And the conclusion of that study really was that an additional funding source is needed to achieve the goals and the service objectives of the system plan, both for operating funds and for capital funds. One of the points, and this was brought up earlier, is that in this analysis that was done for the system plan, raising VRE fares to close the gap wasn't a sustainable solution. You, in effect, priced riders out of the market and constrained the ridership potential because of that pricing structure. Since the plan was adopted in 2014, there's been a number of efforts to implement the plan. Much of it you've seen in the capital improvements program, projects like the Quantico Station expansion, the Crystal City station improvements projects that are now underway in the planning and design and construction phases. VRE has been pursuing funding from various sources to implement that capital program, which our current capital program is largely funded. I believe it's about 75% funded. So we've been able to make large inroads in implementing those capital improvements that set up the stage for future service. We've already talked about the shift away from the Gainesville Haymarket extension that was identified in the system plan to the Broad Run expansion. But one of the major accomplishments is the implementation of the Commuter Rail Operating and Capital Fund, which is a step to identifying those additional funding sources for capital and operating funds that will allow the realization of the long-term vision that's outlined in the system plan. There are a number of things have changed. The plan was adopted in 2014, so that's 6-7 years ago. Transforming rail in Virginia has had a significant impact on the future VRE environment that we'd be operating in, as well as providing opportunity to define some of the service expansion that is consistent with our system plan. The TRV service plans are an incremental step toward achieving that vision that was outlined in the system plan in increasing both the peak period, peak direction service and allowing opportunities for other service such as reverse peak or midday service. Other trends and changes include the introduction of hot lanes on both the I-66 and the I-95 corridors that have become another component in the regional travel network, and bear looking at in the future update of a system plan as to what that impact may be on future demand, as well as other modes, alternative modes that are available, and then changes in travel trends generally within the region,
but also the COVID-related influences, which is something we're still starting to try and get our handle on, not just at VRE, but for all transit providers in the region. Potential next steps, timeframe, I believe is right to look at an update of the system plan to address some of these emerging trends and opportunities, changes in our environment, and understand the current demand for VRE service. Also identifying untapped markets, both within and potentially beyond the current VRE service area. Explicitly, the Operations Board in the last system plan did not want to look at any extensions beyond the current boundaries of the VRE service area. But that would be something, there's a desire to do that, that could be looked at in an update of the system plan. The other thing would be looking at the non-traditional markets outside the commute market and identify potential demand and potential untapped markets there. And then looking at continuing to look at system safety considerations and enhancements, as well as areas such as environmental sustainability, climate change, which are becoming very important regionally and nationally in how the transportation and transit facilities and service can address those objectives. So that was the last slide. So I'd be glad to take any questions if anybody has any questions or comments on updating a system plan and what some of the focus should be.
We didn't do it when we did the 2040 plan, updated it, but have we taken into consideration high-speed rail? Ms. Mitchell could give us a time frame for that, because it sort of comes up on the screen, then sort of. Have we ever considered that that would be part of VRE from Spotsylvania on? Because I know we got third rail. Fourth rail, I guess I'm asking, would be that of the high speed.
And when you talk about high speed or, well, all of the plans we have in transforming rail in Virginia are based on sort of the conventional technology and the Amtrak new fleet that is expected. The DC to RVA study, when we looked at a potential alignment, did look at an alignment that could support higher speeds, but I think it was still up to, Emily, is it 79 miles per hour was the max speed?
That's what, yeah, it's not the high speed European. It's more like 80 with a minor banking.
And I think as long as we're in a commingled corridor with freight, I don't see that passenger rail service will be able to go much faster than that. It's also somewhat limited by just the tracks. The biggest, even if we were to build out a full third and full fourth track, have a fully separated network, I think because of the proximity to the freight line, we still are going to be somewhat reliant on lower speeds. That's my guess. So I don't know that helps out much with estimate, but Emily, I don't know if you had anything you want. I'm looking at Emily because Emily managed our high-speed rail study. So I don't know if you would add anything to that.
We found that breaking the curve for higher speed a lot more rate. There are some spots in tonight, but definitely not.
Yeah, I definitely would encourage you to take another look at the. Obviously, we've seen so many changes in commuting patterns. I think it expand it's just a little bit service, but other things that might need to build. And I would also just point out that our whole system is built on the premise of a single core. Just in what we're doing with Crystal City, I think it demonstrates we're in the future. employment centers are not just gonna be down. I think it would be helpful for us to factor that into our plans as we think.
Okay. Thank you, Christine. And as I said before, this topic will be ongoing, right? We just want to sort of reset here a little. Next up, we just got a couple of items. Next up is Mr. Schofield, our Chief Financial Officer. He'll be talking about just a quick update to the proposed C-Rock. So with that, Mr. Schofield.
Thank you, Rich. Good morning, Chair and board members. If I could just tag back real quick to the question that Ms. Lawson asked earlier about the monthly passes. I lowballed that number a little bit. Monthly passes are discounted by about 34% off of the cost of a one ride. Just wanted to. So this is an information item. It is intended to sort of get you ready for the action item that we're going to have next month, where we will be coming to you asking for your go ahead to move from the planning phase on the debt issuance into actually the action, as you might call it. We have been working closely with PFM on this. Joanne Carter, the lead of their team, will be here this next month. So she and I will provide sort of a tag team presentation next month. I'll just give you the Cliff Notes version here today. Also, between now and then, her team is going to run new numbers on current market conditions as of the beginning of November. So we'll be able to bring new to you then as well. Just to sort of remind you of where we are, the operations board and the commissions get sort of multiple bites at the apple on this very important issue. Back in November of 2020, the operations board gave us the authorization to enter into the agreement with Time DRPT, now OBPRA, to have the funding agreement wherein we would use the HEROC monies to support TRV, both through the issuance of debt and through pay-go capital. That agreement was actually executed then in March of this year. In July of this year, this board gave the approval to refer our amended debt management principles to the commissions, which the commissions then approved, bringing in the nuances of the CROC. What are the guidelines that we're going to use to do any debt issuance backed by the CROC? As I said, we'll be coming to you next month asking for approval and referral to the commissions. We will come with a proposal for how we want to move ahead with the debt issuance. That will sort of close out the phase one of the analysis, and you all will hopefully give us the okay to move into sort of the phase two to actually move ahead with concrete steps to issue the debt, doing the tax due diligence, working with the ratings agencies, choosing the underwriter and the trustee, all of those actual steps that need to be taken. Then early in 2022, we don't know exactly what month that will be, we would come back for the final action by the operations board and the commissions with the actual concrete debt documents that you all would then approve. That would allow us to then go work and get final credit ratings with the agencies and actually market and issue and sell the bonds. So we are sort of at step number 3 of 4 right now. So the two things that I want to talk about briefly, one is the credit assessment. So before we even look at options of how we might do a debt issuance, the question is, how is the market going to look at bonds that are backed by the HEROC, which is ultimately backed by regional gas taxes? In general, across all 3 of the major ratings agencies, they're looking at roughly the same things. They may weigh them differently. They may have slightly different indicators. But in general, this box here, if you look at the top 3 on the box, these are kind of the macro level things that they're looking at. The underlying drivers of the stream, like how is Northern Virginia and the Washington region doing, which is very positive. The breadth and the concentration of the tax base, again, looking at a gas tax versus a sales tax versus whatever other options there might be. And then what are the trends in that revenue? What's the volatility? What sort of risk comes along with that? Then at the bottom, those 3 are more sort of micro, more specific to the actual CROC backed debt that we're talking about. How are the revenues actually collected? In our case, looking at the regional gas taxes that then go to DMV that to the commissions. What is our proposed coverage on the debt service that is out of the total amount of this EROC? How much are we actually committing to the debt service and how much would we have left over? And then sort of the nuts and bolts of the actual bond documents. What are the legal protections that are in there for the bondholders? How is risk to the bondholders being mitigated? Things like that. Broadly, that's what the ratings agencies. Joanne will be able to talk in a lot more detail about this. She lives and breathes it. They're talking to the ratings agencies all the time, but their initial assessment of where a EROC-backed debt issuance would fall compared to some very recent comparables here in Virginia, that's what's in this table right here. Their estimate is that we would be sort of squarely in the bottom of the middle of investment grade. So if you think about going from AAA to AA to A, and then you have sort of notches in between there, their estimate is that we would AA3, so a little bit on the lower end of AA. If you look at the next, so that's the one with green heading. If you look at the next column over, the I-81 bonds, which are also gas tax backed, PFM has been working very closely on that one as well. In fact, we were in the room with them when they just an hour earlier had gotten the indication from Moody's of what their rating was going to be. They were actually pleasantly surprised. They were expecting AA2, and it came in at AA1. So that was nice to hear. Again, this is not, luckily, this is not like a guessing game. Moody's in particular is very transparent about how they weigh things, what the factors are, so you can sort of recreate within a certain tolerance what Moody's is likely to give you. The S&P is a little more qualitative, but again, they do sort of tell you how they evaluate things like this. So this isn't just a guess. This is a very sort of educated guess. So again, this is just PFM's estimate of where we would land. If we do move ahead, one of the initial steps we would take would be to go to the ratings agencies and get what are called indicative ratings, because this is a brand new credit, because we've never issued bonds backed by this EROC before. We would do that relatively early in phase 2, and then again at the very end we would get the final credit ratings. The other two that are on there are the HR TAC down in Hampton Roads, and then of course the NBTA here. Again, both broadly in that sort of AA category, a little bit different because those have sources other than just gasoline taxes that are being used for those bonds. But in general, I think the takeaway message here is a very positive one. We had said that we wanted to have this be an investment grade issuance. It seems to be squarely landing there, which means that there then in turn would be an appetite in the market for these bonds. So then once you've sort of established that, then you turn to what are the options that we are looking at. And so PFM looked at 5 different options, 4 of which listed here would be sort of primary options, and then the last one on the list would be a potential supplementary option that you might be able to sort of mix and match. So the first, and VRE and the commissions have actually already used a number of these. These are not new to us. So the first one is a public bond sale. So directly issuing to the markets. The original revenue bonds for VRE were issued this way. The second one is the Virginia Resources Authority and their Virginia Pooled Financing Program. So VRA provides financing to local governments for all kinds of transportation, water, sewer, jails, that kind of infrastructure all across the Commonwealth. It's a shared program where the needs of multiple different agencies or entities are sort of joined together. It's a way to lower transactions costs and let smaller issuers join together into sort of one large issuance. Those of you who were here in 2018 will recall that we used VRA to refinance the rail car debt that we have and to lower the interest costs there. That is a very straightforward kind of process. The third one on the list then is the relatively well-known TIFIA program that's run through the Build America Bureau of the USDOT. They provide credit assistance to transportation projects all across the country, highways, transit, railroad, ports, all different kinds of things. They offer direct loans, loan guarantees, and standby lines of credit. To date, VRE has not used TIFIA. And then the fourth is the RIF program, also through the USDOT. similar in a lot of ways to the TIFIA program, but specifically at railroads. We utilized RIF back in the late 2000s to do the initial loans on the roads. So we had the RIF loan and then we used the VRA to refinance that. And then the last one on there, as I said again, which would potentially be a supplement rather than a standalone, is the VTIB, or the Virginia Transportation Infrastructure Bank. So this is a special sub-fund of the state's transportation trust fund, and the state is able to use that to provide low-cost financing to a number of different. So, looking at these options, we actually are able to pretty quickly strike 3 of them off. The VRA indicated in conversations to us that they require credit support from the member jurisdictions. We had stated at the outset that we wanted this to be strictly a revenue-backed bond and not have to use the faith and credit of the jurisdictions. Not a reflection on gas tax, it more has to do with the legal structure of the VRA. That one is off the table. If you're looking at the 2 USDOT programs, they are very similar. They would give us similar interest costs and sort of total proceeds, but the RIF program requires the payment of what's called a credit risk premium right at the outset. That would be sort of disadvantageous. So if we're going to go the USDOT route, it appears TIFIA is always better than RIF, at least in this case. So we're going to take RIF off the table. And then VTIB has relatively limited funds, lots of competing priorities. And in discussion with the VPRA, it seemed that if we were going to use VTIB to support TRV, that it would be better to do it directly through the VPRA rather than kind of indirectly through VRE. So that again was never going to be the entire way of doing it, but now that's kind of off the table as well. So really down, to 2 options, to the public bond issue or to TIFIA. And so the major advantage of TIFIA is lower interest costs. It's a subsidized interest, lower than you can get in the market. And so that would give us larger total loan proceeds that they would be. Since again, we're sort of taking the amount of annual debt service that we're going to have as a given, we're trying to leverage that into the most sort of proceeds that we can. Given the market conditions when we did the earlier analysis around the end of August, TIFIA would produce about $108 million of proceeds that would be available to the project. A public issuance would generate about $134 million. So they're both quite large, but again, about a 10 to 20% difference. TIFIA. However, the advantages of doing a public sale are pretty significant apart from the total dollar. One is the time frame. We would be able to complete a public sale much quicker than having to go through the application process with the COT. Not only would this mean that we would be able to get VPRA quickly, but it would reduce the interest rate risk. The risk that as we're waiting to go through the process, that interest rates would go up. Number 2 has to do with the debt service reserve fund. We would be able to, doing a public sale, we would be able to use the proceeds of that to put money into the reserve. We would not be able to do that with TIFIA. We would have to fund that reserve out of the PAYGO portion of the CROC at the beginning, which would mean that we would have to repay that again at a 10-year period. A third has to do with sort of crafting the bond documents and the other legal documents. We would have a lot more flexibility in doing the crafting of those when all we would have to satisfy would be the underwriters that we have, whereas USDOT is going to have very specific sort of and potentially more constraining requirements. And related to that, a fourth reason to prefer the public sale is a greater flexibility and ability to refinance that debt at some point in the future if the market conditions would make that attractive. We have been in a lot of constant communication with VPRA as we've done this analysis, and I really want to express my thanks to Steve Pittard, who is their CFO. Constructive discussion. They understand our interest in maintaining that flexibility, and as you can imagine, they also have an interest in quickly. And so our recommendation at this point, which does have the VPR's backing, is that we would go ahead with the public sale option rather than the TIFIA option. So when we come to you next month, we'll lay this out in a bit more detail. Joanne will be happy to talk about some of those nuances with, credit ratings agencies, and her team will have done an update to those numbers that I gave you for the proceeds. So we'll have those a little more locked in, at least based on current conditions. And so we will be asking you all for your approval and your referral to the commissions for their approval to sort of conclude this analysis phase and move forward into really sort of the action phase. Again, sort of getting the Avengers together, getting the underwriters, the trustee, Steve, the bond counsel, all of that to really begin, process of doing issuance. So that I'm happy to take it.
So just layman's terms, 'cause that was great, but I'm just making sure that, for point of clarity. So these two recommendations are based on flexibility and risk management and mitigation. Is it safe to assume that?
Yes, our preference for a public bond issuance over TIFIA is for exactly the reasons that you said.
Okay. Just for clarity, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Last information item. There is one item on the spending authority report. I think it's self-explanatory. If you have any questions about that, I can take the item or get the questions, but this was the result of our procurement we did. So no questions. That is the end of the half marathon information item session, Madam Chair.
Now we will move into a closed session. Ms. Lawson?
Pursuant to the Virginia Freedom of Information Act. Discussing one matter. This is including rail operations, rail discussion, and strategy of the investment of public funds related to service where the competition if made public initially, the financial adversely affect reputation with legal counsel concerning the terms of agreement.
Is there a second to this motion? In favor, please say aye. Aye.
Okay, thanks, Madam Chair. There are there'll be a couple of staff members that will executive director. Okay, I think we got it. John, let me know when you are no longer recording. Madam Chair, we are.
We are live. We are reconvening in open session.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To certify closed session, the VRE Ops Board, to the best of each member's knowledge and with just completed session, only public business matters were lawfully exempt from open meeting requirements under the Freedom of Information Act were discussed, and only such public business matters as were identified in the motion closed session was convened, discussed, and considered.
Crystal, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Abstentions? Do any board members have any remarks or announcements to make time? None? Is there a motion and a second to adjourn? Okay, Ms. Bailey, second by Ms. Crystal. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.